Hello, I'm Charles Kolodkin. I'm the Executive Director of Enterprise Risk and Insurance at Cleveland Clinic, and I'm here to talk to you about medical malpractice insurance. Medical malpractice insurance is sometimes referred to as professional liability insurance. It's a product designed for professionals, clinicians, psychologists, and those types of individuals. Sometimes it's referred to as physician professional liability insurance or healthcare professional liability insurance. I'll refer to it as medical malpractice insurance. Malpractice has a negative connotation, but it's the customary way to refer to this product. What is medical malpractice insurance exactly? Well, it's a product that's designed to cover claims made against a clinician when negligence is alleged in the conduct of their professional activities. So that would be the rendering of medical care. It is not something like when an individual might slip on a carpet and sue someone. That would be general liability. It would not be a product, it's different from homeowners insurance, which is also a general liability product. Medical malpractice is typically unique to physicians. What is covered in medical malpractice insurance? Well, medical malpractice insurance is designed to cover injuries to patients. Patients may allege all sorts of bodily injuries and damages. These could include future and past medical expenses that they've incurred because of the alleged negligence. It would also be any kind of loss of income. It could also be pain and suffering, and in extreme cases, it would be a death benefit to the survivors. Additionally, medical malpractice insurance provides defense coverage, and defense coverage would entail an insurance company hiring a defense attorney to represent your interests should you be involved in a lawsuit. It would also cover the costs of experts and any kind of other discovery expenses that might be incurred during the defense of the case. Medical malpractice insurance also has riders, and these riders could be akin to on your auto liability insurance where you have towing coverage or you have rental car coverage. They're add-ons, they're really extras, and you can sometimes see medical malpractice insurance extending to provide coverage for peer review actions. They could cover situations where there's allegations of fraud and abuse, and sometimes even cyber liability where there might be a alleged inadvertent breach of confidentiality. But those are, like I said, riders, and the real product is designed to cover medical malpractice claims asserting negligence. So who is covered in these products? Well, obviously the physician himself or herself is going to be the key insured. Additionally, you can have your practice added to your policy. So, for example, it's John Smith Colorectal Surgery Limited, and that would be added. And that's sometimes important when you have a practice that employs a lot of individuals, nurses and allied health professionals. So they could be covered by this policy as well. So physicians oftentimes ask, what are appropriate policy limits? And before we talk about appropriate policy limits, let's talk what policy limits really cover. When you look at a medical malpractice insurance policy, you'll typically see two numbers. The first number will say, for example, $1 million each claim. That means that the most the insurance will cover is $1 million for each claim. So it sounds straightforward. But what is a claim? Is it if it involves a individual who is injured and he makes a claim and his wife also makes a claim, is that one or two claims? And in fact, that is one claim. In addition, there's a second number called the policy aggregate. So it may say $3 million policy aggregate. So what the insurance company is saying is the most they'll pay in one policy year is $3 million. Said another way, you could have $1 million claim and then 4 or 5 other claims for about $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000, and the carrier will keep on covering you, at least for that policy year, up until $3 million is exhausted in that policy term. So that is what the aggregate provides. Now, one very important aspect of this coverage is the treatment of defense costs. So you should look and ask your carrier, how are defense costs treated? Defense costs will be covered, but some carriers will say any kind of money that we pay for defending you goes against the cost of a claim. So for example, if you have, or the carrier has incurred $100,000 for defense attorneys and experts, then you may have only $900,000 left to pay a settlement or judgment. That's known as erosion of limits by defense costs. That's typically or usually not preferred. Another very important component of policy limits is whether or not the policy limits are shared or separate. So earlier we talked about having the physician covered by the policy as well as the practice. If you have both parties covered by it and have separate limits, then really you have $2 million worth of coverage available. Sometimes carriers will say, we will cover all of you, your nurse, your allied health people, the corporation, but you have to share the limits of coverage, the $1 million. And not surprisingly, shared limits is less expensive than having separate limits. Physicians often ask, how much insurance is appropriate for me to purchase? And that really does vary not only by specialty class. Typically obstetricians will want to have more coverage than a radiologist. However, it's really most determinate by what venue or state you practice in. So for example, Ohio, the norm is to carry $1 million worth of coverage, whereas in a state like Florida, surprisingly, $250,000 seems to be the norm. Likewise, in a place like Texas, it may be $500,000. But in certain states, it may be dictated by the laws of that state, and there's nuances as to how the laws in states such as Indiana, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are. And so the right amount of insurance is dictated by the laws, and you will get advice from either your agent or carrier as to what is appropriate to purchase. Perhaps the most confusing aspect of medical malpractice insurance is what is claims-made coverage. The coverage form in medical malpractice policies is almost always now under something called claims-made coverage. It's different than homeowners or auto insurance, and it's got a couple of different triggers, and you have to be aware of it. What a medical malpractice policy covers is it covers claims made during the policy year if it arises from events occurring after the policy retroactive date. So what's happened is the carrier has established several dates. So for example, you might see a policy term of January 1, 2016 to January 1 of 2017. And what the carrier is saying is, we will cover you for any claims that are made during that 12-month period. However, there's another trigger called the retroactive date. And the retroactive date will usually be an earlier date. So for example, your policy retroactive date may be January 1, 2014. And what this means is that the carrier will cover you for any claims that are made during this calendar year of 2016, but only for events that occurred or arose after this January 1, 2014 retroactive date. And there's a lot of reasons why this is set up, and it's not an insurance trick or anything. It's really just designed to manage the flow of claims and make sure that there's adequacy of coverage limits and that the price is appropriate for the risk. One characteristic of claims-made policies is that the premiums are stair-stepped. What this means is they're initially low and then they level out over 3 to 5 years. So for a physician who's leaving residency, the first year's premium will be low, the second year will be more than the first year, and the third year will be more than the second, and then they will level out. And the reason for this is the risk profile for a physician coming out in their first year or two is lower or less than a physician who's been in practice for 4 or 5 years. Now, one really important thing to remember about claims-made coverage is it requires the purchase of an extended reporting provision, sometimes called a tail. So you may have heard of the tail buyout provision, and that's what this means. So after you leave the practice of medicine, either by retiring, dying, becoming disabled, or sometimes moving to another jurisdiction, you will need to buy your tail. And there's going to be an additional cost for this. But at the end of the day, when you add up all of the premiums under a claims-made coverage, it'll be about the same as it would had you bought something called occurrence coverage at the beginning. So finally, what are other points to consider when you're looking at medical malpractice insurance? Well, let's begin with carriers. There are a lot of different insurance carriers that offer medical malpractice insurance. I think one of the most important things to consider is the financial ratings. You don't want a carrier that's not around to pay your claim when you have a claim. So that should be the first thing that you look at. Another thing to look at is the ownership and governance of an insurance company. Some carriers are publicly traded, others are mutual companies or owned by the policyholders. Some are governed by physicians, others are governed by executives. So you want to look at that and determine what's a good fit for yourself. And then lastly, you want to look at the services offered by the carrier. Some carriers offer lots of risk management and educational services, others just offer you a product. So you have to weigh all of those things in addition to the premium and then come to the right conclusion for yourself. Another thing to consider when you're looking at and evaluating an insurance company is what kind of services they offer. Some just offer bare bones coverage. Others have robust programs of risk management and education. And so you should evaluate that and determine if that's of service of value to you. It's important to look at the policy terms and conditions when you're evaluating medical malpractice insurance coverage. An example would be, what is the definition of a claim? In the strictest sense, a carrier might say a claim is only a claim if there's a lawsuit filed. Other carriers will say a claim can be a claim if there's an attorney involvement, if an attorney has written you a letter and making a demand. The most liberal definition and the most preferred is when a carrier has a language for a claim stating that if there's an event that you think that might lead to a claim or lawsuit, you can report it and we will consider it a claim. So to me, that's the most preferred approach. Another important term and condition is the insurance company's position on settlement. As a physician, I think you want to have a say-so in how a claim is resolved. And so there's a provision called insured's consent to settle. This is important, and if you have it in your policy, you dictate when the case is settled. However, some carriers do not have that language, and therefore they can settle a claim without your consent. And so that's something that I think that many physicians will want to avoid. Lastly, there's this component or aspect of the tail. Some of the physician-owned carriers have a very broad approach to tail, and they will give you a free tail upon death, disability, or retirement, which is obviously preferred and can save you a lot of money. Other carriers will say you have to buy a tail anytime you leave our company. So for an individual who's 65, this free tail, if you're going to retire in the next couple of years, is very important. So I hope this information has been very helpful for you. There's a lot of information and sources you can go to for information. The Cleveland Clinic's intranet has information on the SharePoint site under the Enterprise Risk and Insurance Department. In addition, the internet is filled with information about medical malpractice insurance, and you just put that into your search engine and I think you'll find a lot. So good luck, and I hope this information has been beneficial.